Hello and welcome to the Network Professor, a series of podcasts hosted by me, Lynn Jones, Product Manager at Hughes Europe. Hello, and I'd like to welcome to this week's podcast, Caroline Roodhouse. So hello and welcome.
Hi Glenn, thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Today's podcast, I'm not going to make any apologies. It's talking about a subject which even today people are very reluctant to talk about. With it being World Mental Health Awareness Day, we're going to talk about mental health, and we're also going to talk about the impact of death by suicide. I first met Caroline probably about 2 months ago, and it was off the back of a incident earlier on this year where someone very close to me had some mental health issues, and it made me start thinking about, what can we do about this? How can we improve things? How can we help matters? And I started seeing some posts on LinkedIn from Caroline, and I saw one which her daughter had written and done a video called Words Matter. And I listened to it, and it was very hard hitting. And so I reached out to Caroline, or I commented on the post, then reached out to Caroline to have a chat about it. So Caroline, do you want to sort of elaborate on why Evie did this post and what led up to this post?
Yeah, absolutely. So starting at the beginning, I guess, back in 2018, I sadly lost my husband to suicide, which was the biggest shock of our lives. He was fine. There were no signs, no suggestion that he was struggling. He went out to work one morning, and that was the last time I saw him. And I was notified by police 2 days later that he'd taken his own life, which to this day remains a complete shock to me and to everybody that knew him. Steve was just an amazing guy, brilliant dad, very well respected at work, an awesome leader of people. We had 2 children at the time. They were 9 and 2, Evie and Ada. And as you can imagine, we had a horrendous time directly after that and for quite some time, which we can go into later. But around the animation, so as I said, Evie was 9 when Steve died, and she started senior school 2 years later, having had a really tough time, obviously. And one of the things that she really, really struggled with when she first started senior school was hearing just horrendous language being used around the subject of suicide. So she'd hear kids saying, I'll kill myself if I've got to sit through another maths lesson, or there's this acronym that they use, KYS, which suggests from one child to another, go and kill yourself if you've done something perceived to be a bit silly or a bit embarrassing. And this KYS is written everywhere, from social media to on the backs of kids' hands, on the toilet walls, on the school bags. And it would really upset her, and she'd come home crying most days. And I talked to her a lot about this, and she did what I do and turned to writing as a kind of way of releasing some of the frustration. And she wrote a story about how it was making her feel. That story was then turned into the animation, which you saw, Glenn, called Words Matter, which is about just under 3 minutes long, but it's a very, like you say, hard-hitting, emotive story about the impact on a child when these words and phrases are trivialized, and the impact that can have when it really has an effect on a child who's lost a parent. And when I shared it on LinkedIn, I got a huge amount of praise from people praising Evie for being so brave, but also welcoming this resource for not only for schools, but also for charities and workplaces. So mental health first aiders are using it, line managers are using it. The NHS are using it in their induction training. Over the course of the last sort of few months where it's been out in the open, it's just taken flight and become a really useful resource for so many different organisations to bring up that topic of language around the subject of suicide and how we need to get better at how we use it.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I mean, when I sat and listened to it, it was first thing in the morning, just before I started work, and I welled up. I mean, they were from someone so young, they were very powerful words, and it is true. I think, I'm of an age where when I grew up, there wasn't social media. You'd have playground banter, but I'd never remember it getting to the sort of level that the kids see today on social media. And words do matter. I mean, we're going to touch on it later when we talk about kindness. And again, a kind word is so powerful, and people don't really get that and understand it. So, but yeah, I was blown away by, obviously the things he must have gone through and be going through to produce such a, I mean, I'm going to call it a lovely video. It's the sort of video you wouldn't want, a 15-year-old to have to create, but it's so good that she did.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it does definitely come with a warning. You need a box of tissues if you're going to watch it, but it is an important thing to see and to share. And I would urge anyone to watch it and to share it with people that you know.
So just going back to Steve, now, you say, there was no outward signs. Now, I'll be honest, my experience earlier on this year, again, there was no outward signs that there was anything wrong. And I don't know whether that is just the inherent British nature or whether it's, the fact we hide things. It's, why don't we talk about it? Why don't we talk about things like this more? And what are you trying to do to change that?
Absolutely. It's certainly something that I've had endless conversations about since then. And there's this kind of need for men to feel that they are providing for the family and, stiff upper lip, and we don't talk about the problems that we have. We have to just come across as being strong and brave providers for the family. And I think that's something that is being talked about more and more. I think for Steve, it's something that I never realised he struggled with. It was certainly something he never talked about. And that's one of the things that frustrates me the most, that I'm sure most people could sit there and say in a relationship, you talk about everything, the ups and the downs, the kids, everything. And this was one thing that he never spoke about, whatever was leading him to where he ended up. And I will never know that. So it's frustrating, and it's a societal issue that we all need to be conscious of, and to understand how we can do something about it in our own small corners of the world. And that is why I now talk openly and honestly about our experience, about where Steve may have been through in his own mind at the time, and the impact that it's had on us since then. And it really does stop people in their tracks to read about this and to understand the deep complexities of how a family is impacted by suicide, and how it just goes on and on and on. It's not just something that happens and after a few months or a couple of years you're okay. It's a permanent impact that will never change. And I often talk about how suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And whatever that temporary problem is, we need to talk about it. So, going back to your question, it's something that I talk about a lot, and this is the reason why. And I get people contacting me most days, and mostly men, saying that I've read your posts, I understand how awful this has been for you, how sad it is for your children to grow up without a father, what that impact would be on my family if I were to do the same thing. And it's made me stop and think that I need to get help. I can recognize that I'm struggling. I know that things aren't right, and I can see where I could end up. And thank you for painting that picture for me. Whilst it's horrendous that we've been through what we have, I feel it's a privilege for me to be able to step into that person's world just for a moment and make them stop and reflect on their own situation.
Yeah, and certainly I've found that I read all your posts and some of the ones that you repost as well, and it does make you think. And like I said, I certainly won. Over the years, yeah, I've hit rock bottom sometimes and not talked about it, but then pulled myself out and got back up and kept on going. But speaking with an ex-colleague of mine, she went through something very similar. She stopped that moment just before and said, actually, no, this isn't right. But she was saying that it wasn't her voice in her head.
Yeah.
It was another voice in her head that was telling her to do it. And it's just the bit about talking about it. And as I said at the beginning, and certainly men, I'll freely admit, yes, like you said, you'll talk and discuss things with your other half, with your family, but you don't talk about everything, because it's whether you're admitting that actually I am fragile. I'm not that superhero that I think people, that my children might think I am, but I don't want to admit that. Where actually we need to admit it and talk about it.
I think perhaps people, particularly men, as we say, might be afraid to say that within their own family unit. So we have to be able to provide those other opportunities for people to speak about this beyond those four walls. And that may be within friendship groups, and it may be within the workplace. So a lot of what I do now is do talks and workshop sessions with groups of mental health first aiders, for example, to talk about the situation that I'm now in, that Steve was in, and how we can create these safe spaces for people to bring up these issues at work, and how people like mental health first aiders or mental health champions can be more receptive and more open and create that environment where it's okay to speak up. And it's okay for somebody to say, I am having a bad day. Have you got 5 minutes for us to have a quick chat? And to not be afraid to respond to that. And if you see somebody upset or crying in the corridor, put your arm around them, have a chat with them, say a kind word to them, and be that person that could make that difference. And that's a lot of what I talk about at the moment with these groups of people in the sessions that I do, which I think make a real difference. It's that confidence. That there's also this perception that if we say to somebody, I'm really worried about you at the moment, are you thinking about taking your own life, or have you considered doing something to yourself? That isn't going to encourage somebody to do that. The message is that it's okay to ask that question, because it will open up that conversation. And if somebody is struggling, it gives them the opportunity to respond. It will never put an idea in their mind that wasn't already there.
Yeah. And I think because a few people at work know what I went through early on this year. I mean, one of my colleagues, we were quite, still not totally open with each other, but we are more open because his brother, well, officially he wasn't registered. His death wasn't registered as death by suicide. It was other factors. It pretty much was. So he knows, and just having that sort of common thing, and realizing actually I'm not the only one, and I think that's just it. Like I said earlier, I'll guarantee you, if everyone was truly honest, they've had a day when maybe they've not thought that far, but it's been a bad day, and it's like, how do I get out of this? How do I pull myself up and get back onto an even keel?
Absolutely. And I'll often picture in my head that journey that Steve had been on. And I picture it as it's a piece of string, and that you get to a certain point where there's no turning back. And I think, had I been able to recognize that, or had he felt safe enough to raise that with somebody in his life, there might have been a point where he could have turned back, but he reached that point of no turning back, and that's what we want to stop people doing. So, like you've said, that kind of breaking the silence with colleagues and friends, it's a slow process, but it's breaking it down to the point where people feel safer to talk and to be open and honest about their challenges and their concerns about other people too.
Yeah, and I think as we've both said, it's not even just that talking about it. It's just that act of, you're out somewhere, you interacting with somebody, in the shop or whatever, and it's just that little act of kindness that you never know that if they may be having a bad day, and then they suddenly go, oh, actually, oh, that was a nice comment, or whatever, or a nice act, and it changes their perception. And it may only be for that one moment, but it starts hopefully putting seeds of doubt or whatever into their mind that actually, maybe this isn't the right way. Maybe, there is a better way of dealing with this.
Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely understand those moments that you mean, and that they could be so minor and so trivial, but they can make a difference. And I refer to them as glimmers. So those moments where it makes you stop and think. Somebody smiles at you in the street. Somebody lets you out in a traffic queue, and a few of those throughout your day build up to make a difference, and you feel that there is kindness in the world. And we, like you say, we've talked about that a lot, and that comes out of Evie's animation too. And it kind of pushes that dark cloud aside just for a moment.
Yeah. So obviously you've been doing all these LinkedIn posts. You've got a book coming out today. Do you want to just touch on, why, you've taken obviously what you're posting, and what have you tried to create with this book?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I recall speaking to my therapist about was being able to get some of these emotions out of my head and onto paper. And I did start to write a couple of years ago, and I noticed that I was starting to form chapters, and I felt that it was coming together as a book. And people would say to me, oh, you ought to write a book about this, because there's a lot of other elements to our life, and our story that I've included in this book too. I wanted other people in my position to feel less alone, and to feel that they had something that they could relate to. And having written this book and shared it with certain people who I know have lost a partner to suicide, they've told me that they're nodding all the way through. I remember when that happened. I felt the same when I had to talk to my kids about this, or when I felt I wasn't part of society anymore because of that. And whilst it doesn't stop that from happening, it's that kind of relatability and that feeling of being less alone that brings them some degree of comfort. So that was my key reason for writing the book. The book is called Daddy Blackbird, and the reason for that is because in the days after Steve's death, not long after he died, I would have this little visitor in the back garden, and this little blackbird would be bobbing around, and it would come right up to the back door, and it was not afraid to come close to the house. And I remember the first time I saw it thinking, I'm not too keen on you. And that was because it represented this sense of freedom that I couldn't feel. I couldn't understand that. I was drowning in grief and struggling to look after my children on my own. But this blackbird was very persistent, and he would visit every day. And eventually I started to like him. I started to welcome him. I'd throw him bits of food. I'd even peel grapes for him. And I'd call the girls and say, look, Daddy Blackbird's come to visit. And it did bring us some sense of comfort. I'm not spiritual, and I don't particularly believe in reincarnation, but I don't feel that I need to take comfort from this situation. It was just a nice moment that the girls and I could share together. And he still visits today. And there was no other name I could give my book other than Daddy Blackbird. And yeah, as I say, it's out now, and it's there to bring some degree of comfort to people who are in a similar position to me, but also to raise awareness of what it's like to lose a loved one to suicide, so that other people can understand the complexities behind it, and how it's a never-ending thing. I've broken it down into 3 sections. So there's the history, which explains how we got together and some of the amazing adventures that we shared, as well as some of the tragedies and traumas that we faced together. The middle section is all about the horror, which is the tragedy of Steve's death and the aftermath of that. And the final section is called Hope. And that's the one that I want people to focus on most of all, because there is hope. There is that opportunity to create this sense of optimism again. And there are so many different elements that have helped me to achieve that. And I broke them down into my triangle of recovery, which was the power of me, the power of my children, and the power of my community. And all of that came together to help me feel hope again. And I go into a lot of detail about all of that with practical examples in the book.
It sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to read it. I resisted getting some of the sample chapters because I want to read it in its entirety, and I will probably sit there and will sit and read it in its entirety. But I think, like you said, certainly, the latter section, that's the sort of thing people should read and then continually read and refer back to help them understand, maybe help them understand their struggles, or how they can get help with their struggles. And I think that's the thing. In our office, we've got a huge notice board in the corridor next to the kitchen, and it's mental health awareness board, and it's got different things on it which you can take and so on. And people do, you don't see anyone ever taking anything off it, because again, it comes back to that, I guess, not wanting to admit that they may need help. And that's fine. It's I said, I think the British nation, and probably not others around the world, we are quite reserved. But I know that all the stuff you post, I read it regularly. I often forward it on, and I know the posts I sent. I mean, the one about kindness, and we'll just touch on the words in that in a moment. I forwarded that on, and I know it's already had over 200 impressions. So now, how much of it is being read, but it's at least been looked at, and that's just in a short space of time since I reposted it. So it shows that actually, while on the face of it, people may not want to talk about it, they certainly want to read and listen about, to what people have to say, so that they can at least consider, their thoughts and what they might need to do.
Definitely, there is that curiosity, and I think that's a great place to start. And it's great to hear about that notice board that you've got with those tools and resources. And a lot of what I talk about in the book signposts to different tools and resources. There's some amazing charities out there, not just the Samaritans, who are fantastic, but there's all different organisations. Suicide and Co is another fantastic organisation for people who have been bereaved by suicide, and another one called SOBS, which is Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide, who do support groups all over the country. And the one charity for children that I used in particular was called Winston's Wish, which was amazing. And that's the one thing that I would encourage people to do, is to get more curious. Don't be ashamed to take things off that notice board. Don't be ashamed to research what it's like to lose a loved one to suicide, or how you can support somebody who's going through that. There's no shame whatsoever, and one of the things we need to do together as a society is to break down that stigma that you've just been describing. So I would be more than happy to come and stand next to that notice board one day and talk to people all day long about how I'm intent on reducing that stigma and how we can do that together.
And I think it comes back to a comment you made when we were discussing doing this podcast, when I said to you, I am going to do a podcast. I have told our marketing manager, and they're like, I am doing this. It's not a case of can I do this? I am going to do this. Because even if it only gets one person thinking about it, that's one extra person that has started thinking about it. And I know you made a comment that, even now you talk to some businesses and it's like, oh, well, I have to get approval from them and them. And it's like, no, I am doing this. And marketing manager, she was like, yeah, no, I'm totally up for it. Let's do it. And I know, we've got 5 mental health first aiders in our office, and our office is only 60 people.
That's amazing.
So there is that. How often they people talk to them, different matter, but at least there is that awareness. There is there's still a stigma. I'll be honest, I took something off the notice board, but no one was around when I took it off. Now that wasn't so much necessarily intentionally, but it just so happened that was the case. So it's certainly, I think it's very interesting. It's like you said, it's trying to break down that stigma. It's trying to get people talking, and even if it's, oh, I know someone or whatever, and you don't want to be that open about what you're going through, it's sowing that seed in your mind that says, actually, what are my other options? This surely, if I'm thinking about suicide, surely this is the very last resort. There must be other ways. And actually, it's sort of like, I can't believe it happens instantaneously overnight. You've obviously been building up to that, and it's trying to realize that and try and get that help before it gets to that point where you think your only option is to die by suicide.
Absolutely. And it takes one person to change that, one person to start a movement, one person to get other people curious. So my challenge to you, Glyn, is to wait till the office is completely full and then walk up to that notice board and very obviously take something off it so that people can see you do that.
Challenge accepted, and I will do
goes.
that. Tuesdays in our office are when everyone's in, without exception, and so I will make sure I do that. In fact, actually, we have a big sales meeting first thing in the morning. As we're all coming out of that, there will be 20 odd of us. I will take something off that notice board and show that actually, there's nothing wrong with people being aware that either you or someone may be having problems.
Absolutely. Excellent. That's good to know. I want to know how it goes.
I will certainly let you know. So I just want to touch on your post. It was yesterday, I think it was, where you talk about kindness. And, I'm going to read out your words because, again, it is so true. And basically it goes, kindness has no expiry date. Conditions don't apply. It doesn't come with strings attached. No need to question why. When life feels harsh and times are tough and people let you down, it's kindness that can lift us up and turn our day around. Kindness is a choice we make, a way we want to be. Make a difference, be the change. Kindness is the key. Again, such powerful words, and it's true. I mean, we were chatting just before this, and I was saying how yesterday in the office, I was walking through the building with our digital marketing apprentice, and she suddenly said, "Come on, Glyn, let's skip down the corridor." And we did. And we both had huge smiles on our face. Now, I don't think either of us were particularly down, but even so, kindness comes in many forms. It just livened up the day. It just made a difference. Being a long and busy day, it was middle of the afternoon, and it just livened things up and made me think, and it brought me back to reality. So, kindness comes in many forms, doesn't it?
It does indeed, and it's joy as well, and it's spreading joy and not being afraid to do that, and to be playful as well. It all comes under the same banner, and I talk again about being looking for those glimmers, and for us all to turn into glimmer hunters and to be on the lookout for those moments of joy, however small or insignificant they might seem, and talk about them, or send somebody a message if you've not spoken to them for a while and just let them know you're thinking of them, and check in with other people and and demonstrate that care and humanity between colleagues, friends, family, whoever that might be. And if everybody did a little bit of that, I think the world would be a very different place.
Yeah, it's certainly a kind word to someone you don't even know. You don't know what impact that will have on them, but it may have an impact. And you may never know what that impact was, but it doesn't take much effort to just be kind, even if it's only once a day. I mean, you should be kind all the time, but even if it's only once in a day and you do it every day, it makes a difference to somebody. And hopefully it also makes a difference to you. Because if you start being kind, even if people aren't being kind back to you, don't let that stop you. Don't
No,
feel it's a one-way
absolutely.
thing. Conditions don't apply. So right.
Indeed, and yeah, I think it's quite addictive once you've done it once, and you feel like that went well, it made me smile, it made me feel good. I'll do it again, and
Yeah.
probably worth finishing actually on the final words of Evie's animation, because it's kind of where we started, and it ends with a very poignant message that says, words matter, so think before you speak. Please make kindness a promise that you keep. And whilst that's directed at friends at school, I think it's absolutely relevant to the entire world and to workplaces and adult friendship groups and anywhere else where there's people, to just be kind.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's we could continue talking for hours and hours, but I think that is a very good point to stop on. So thank you very much for your time today, Caroline. It's been very interesting. I can't wait to get my copy of the book, and like I said, I will be sitting down, and I would probably will sit and read it from front to back in one session, because I know based on your post it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be thought-provoking.
Wonderful. Let me know what you think. And thank you very much for having me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.